Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cryosphere Pavilion. This is our last event, and it is on governing the cryosphere beyond political timeframes. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Letizia Tedesco from the Finnish Environment Institute as our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Hami, and hello, everyone. As Hami said, my name is Letizia Tedesco. I'm a senior research scientist at the Finnish Environment Institute, and I'm also co-chair of the BEPSII working group. And I'm here today with Petra Heil. She's a director of science at the British Antarctic Survey, and with Josephine Rapp. She's a science coordinator at Arab Ocean, and also a member of the steering committee of BEPSII. And we present today a post-COP30 analysis governing the cryosphere beyond political timeframes. And this work is currently under consideration on Nature Communication and is already available as a preprint. You have got the DOI on this slide, and you will also have a QR code in the last slide of this presentation. This is a collaborative effort, and several other scientists are involved in this paper, and they are here listed. During these really highly uncertain times, we as scientists feel the need not only to publish peer-reviewed scientific articles, but also making our findings accessible and available to the policymaker. And since the Cryosphere system are nearing irreversible threshold, and yet political processes remain misaligned with the long time scale of ice loss. So we felt the need to write this work. We use COP30 as a context, and we argue that cryosphere science must inform governance capable of linking near-term decisions, the one that happened during a political time frame, with the long-term stability in this very rapidly changing world. So our post-COP30 analysis builds on an open letter to world leaders that was initiated ahead of COP by 4 different cryosphere working groups: BEPSII, CATCH, Aspect, and PACES. You will hear a bit more about those towards the end of the presentation. And we urge that cryosphere thresholds and long-term sea level commitments to be formally integrated into global climate governance. The letter circulated ahead of COP within the scientific community. It was then officially released at the opening of COP30, and the endorsement had remained open throughout COP. The letter was institutionally signed by dozens of scientific organizations and institutes, and you see all those logos of those institute organizations in the slide. And there was a very widespread engagement, and this really underscored the scientific consensus within the scientific community, but also the persistent gaps in the policy response. The letter also received some media attention, both at the regional and international levels. It was, for example, featured by Reuters at the opening of COP, but we were also invited to do a more extensive analysis about irreversible tipping points of the cryosphere by Land and Climate Review. And I'm happy to leave the floor to Petra Heil, who will present the post-COP30 analysis.
Thank you very much, Letizia. Yeah, thanks for welcoming us here. I will provide the background to this story. So as you're well aware, global mean temperatures are now about 1.5 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial levels. This is a huge increase on a very short time scale. This prolonged warming, over 100 years now, is leading to the cryosphere to result in tipping. That means in unstable conditions. The plot on the right shows us the Earth system globally, including the cryosphere mainly found on the northern and the southern poles, as well as in the third pole, especially the Himalayas. And we have had studies of foundational information that confirm that the global tipping can be reached at different warming scenarios. And now we are still below the 2 degrees centigrade scenario identified by the study by Armstrong and McKay. And yet we already evidenced critical tipping happening in the cryosphere as marked in this figure. Further overshoots could commit us on Earth to centuries of sea level rise and permafrost carbon release relating to this warming. We know cryospheric systems are tightly linked to national security, infrastructure, and the economic stability of societies worldwide. Decisions and actions taken at this decade are critical for the fate of the cryosphere for centuries and beyond. These reach from coastal infrastructures, important and human substantial freshwater resourcing, and a string of climate feedbacks, including those that are manageable by us. So what is the issue? We know as the cryosphere warms, the systems are approaching irreversible thresholds. Once transgressed, the way back is a long one. Long horizon climate governance is needed, leading us out to centuries and millennia. The current policy mechanisms remain, however, tied to short pledges, 5-year pledges, and aiming at mid-century targets, which are misaligned with the century of committed ice loss and cryospheric loss. The COP30 seemed implementation and justice in the context. There is an increasing gap between political ambition, loss of international consensus, and the derailment of the physics within the climate system, as evidenced by the cryosphere. The evidence is there, evidence is known, but often ignored or deferred. We have evidence of accelerating ice mass loss, both in Greenland and the West Antarctic ice sheets. Mountain glaciers continue to retreat, and the rate of this retreat is accelerating. We observe permafrost thawing over large regions. A drastic decrease of snow has been observed. Meltwater budgets are changing. Nearly ice-free summers are expected for the Arctic Ocean by 2030. This is only 5 years away. And we have evidenced an abrupt and prolonged decline of Antarctic sea ice, both during summer initially and now all year round since 2016, over the last decade. What is missing? Cryospheric feedbacks are not represented in carbon accounting frameworks used nationally or globally. Also, we are having a dire lack of long-term observations. There is no fiscal funding mechanism and operational support for them established. Finance is poorly aligned to support and understand the systemic risk. And importantly, the cryospheric risk is amplifying global inequities.
Right, I'm going to take over, and we're going to now focus on what would be necessary to align governance with cryospheric timescales. And as a first step, committing dedicated, sustained resources for cryospheric science, not only as temporary projects, but as long-term infrastructure underpinning both the mitigation and adaptation would be necessary. Second, cryospheric knowledge needs to be sustained within global climate frameworks. Existing structures such as the World Meteorological Organization Global Cryosphere Watch could then evolve into permanent science policy interfaces that then deliver continuous assessments to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And thirdly, future global stocktakes need to explicitly quantify irreversible cryospheric risk. For example, through committed sea level rise or projected permafrost carbon release, so that near-term emissions decisions reflect these long-term consequences. If these things are not in place, policy continues to focus on short-term targets while locking in long-term instability. However, this alignment not only needs to happen beyond the global frameworks, but also at national and regional levels. One thing that needs to be implemented is that long-term scenarios must inform planning decisions. And this includes both coastal hazard mapping and permafrost-related infrastructure risk to be included in water resource planning in snow and glacier-fed basins. These type of assessments need then to extend to the century-long timescales at which cryospheric change becomes most consequential. Also, cryosphere governance now increasingly intersects with human rights law. And as courts now recognize the right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, cryospheric instability is becoming a basis for rights-based climate claims.
And finally, transparency and accountability matter. Tracking cryosphere-relevant investments and integrating cryosphere-informed risk disclosures into development banks and climate funds can then help align financial decisions with physical reality rather than short-term political interests. So if we want to summarize and conclude our main take-home message from this post-COP analysis, is that Cryosphere provides a clear and measurable indicator of whether climate action is aligned with the timescales that matter or not. COP30 shows that acknowledgement alone is not enough. Without sustained observations, stable financing, and the integration of cryospheric processes into policy frameworks, we risk continuing to govern for a climate that no longer exists. Safeguarding the cryosphere is therefore not only a specialized concern, it's foundational to long-term climate and societal stability. And ultimately, governing the cryosphere requires acting before irreversible changes become inevitable, so that decisions made today remain effective across the multi-century trajectories now unfolding in the frozen regions of our planet. Before we fully close this talk, we also want to come back and point out the expert networks that were involved in finalizing or spearheading both the Open Letter Initiative as well as this post-COP analysis. And these were 4 expert networks, as you can see here. This is the BEPSII network that is focused on the biogeochemical exchange processes at sea ice interfaces. The Aspect expert group that is focused on Antarctic sea ice processes and climate, as well as the CATCH Science Network, which is interested in understanding the atmospheric chemistry and how it's impacted by cryospheric processes, as well as the PACES project, which looks at air pollution in the Arctic. And with this, we want to close this talk. We want to thank you for your attention. We have added here our contact details. Please feel free to reach out to us with any follow-up questions. We are also highlighting the preprint on which we base this presentation today, looking at how to govern beyond political timeframes, and you find the QR code here. You can also find a direct link to the open letter hosted on our BEPSII website. And thank you very much for your attention.